Hello and welcome into the Birds and Braves podcast. I'm Luke Winstel. Thank you all for tuning in. Today I interviewed Chris Kirschner, Atlanta Hawks beat reporter for The Athletic. In case you're not familiar with it, The Athletic is a subscription-based sports website that provides ad-free national and local coverage in 47 North American cities. Chris just finished up his first year covering a young and exciting Atlanta Hawks team. Now we'll get to the show. Chris, thank you for joining me on the Birds and Braves podcast.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
You're welcome. Well, first off, I wanted to start by talking about the NBA. Is there a clear title favorite, or do you have a title favorite right now in the league?
I would probably say, in my opinion, I think the Clippers probably have the best chance to win the title. They add Kawhi Leonard and Paul George, two of the best two-way players in the league. And then the supporting pieces around them, I think, are very, very good to, complement Kawhi. And for instance, when we're talking, when we're comparing the East and the West, so the Clippers are definitely going to have more challenges than a team like, say, Milwaukee in the East would. So I think if there was anything that would stop them, it's just the amount of competition that they would face in the Western Conference. But as it stands right now, obviously, we're still 2 months away from the start of the season. But if I were to give a title prediction, I think the Clippers are my team that I would watch for.
Well, that leads right into my next question. I was going to ask you, who do you think runs LA? But I assume it's the Clippers for the reasons you just described.
I think the Clippers. I definitely like the Lakers team. Having LeBron and Anthony Davis on the same roster, I mean, there's going to come a point, who knows when it's going to be, but, LeBron's not going to be LeBron for the rest of his career. There's going to come a point where LeBron starts declining. I don't know when that's going to be. But to have him with Anthony Davis, who in my opinion is definitely a top 5 player in the league, it makes them definitely a team that's going to be in contention, or should at least be in contention for most of the season. I think what I'm most curious about for the Lakers is, again, there's going to come a point where LeBron starts declining. Will LeBron, take sort of a back seat to Anthony Davis and let Anthony Davis, have the Lakers as his quote-unquote his own team? So I think if LeBron does that, I think the Lakers are definitely going to be in contention until the end of the season.
Both of those teams made big jumps, big moves in the offseason. I was wondering, which team do you think will take the biggest jump after their offseason?
Trying to think of all the moves. I mean, I think the Clippers, were eliminated in the first round. They won a couple games against the Warriors. Definitely made things interesting in that series. So again, I think the Clippers right now are my favorites. So if I were to say a team, I think the Clippers, just because I think they won 46 games this past season. I could see them definitely in the low 60s. And again, it's tough just being that they are in the Western Conference, so they're going to have a ton of competition. But, the moves they've made this offseason, in my opinion, I think there's a clear number one, and it's the Clippers, in my opinion.
Well, now in the NBA, instead of having a super team or a trio like the Warriors have had, or even like LeBron's Cavaliers had, now there's duos, not really trios, but duos
right
now. Do you have a favorite duo? Is it the Clippers duo, since you've talked a lot about them?
Yeah, I mean, for me personally, having two guys who not only are elite scorers, but also elite defenders, I just think that Kawhi and Paul just complement each other's games so perfectly. So, yeah, I mean, if there was a favorite duo of mine to watch this season, it'd be Kawhi and Paul. Kawhi is, in my opinion, I think the best player in the league at this point. Paul George is definitely a top 10 player in the league, finished third in the MVP this past season. I don't think he's going to, have that kind of season again. But I do think that Paul is one of the top 10 players in the league. I'm also curious to see what the Rockets look like this season with repairing Russell Westbrook with James Harden. I know people are very interested in seeing how that can work. Yes, they played together when they were back in Oklahoma City, but those two players were different. James Harden was the sixth man for Oklahoma City. Yes, they played together, but, James's game has evolved tremendously since when he was with Oklahoma City, and Russell Westbrook's game has evolved too. So to see how that works, I'm very interested, because one of those guys is going to have to change how they play. With the Rockets, it's a lot of isolation looks at the top of the key with Harden. It's just a lot of standing around, and Russell just doesn't play like that. So, they definitely took a very big chance with getting Westbrook. Again, I know there's a lot of strong opinions on Westbrook, but he's one of the best players in the league. And you pair him alongside James Harden, who's also one of the best players in the league, you're going to have success. It's just a matter of how they adjust their games to how they play, how they have played in years past. So I think those two in particular are two of the duos that I'm most looking forward to watching this season.
Yeah, from my perspective, from what I see here in Atlanta, watching from afar, I feel like Houston is James Harden's city. So with Westbrook, I'm assuming he'd be the one that has to take a back seat. Would that be what you think will happen?
Yeah, for sure. It's also interesting because I know Houston fans, when Westbrook was on Oklahoma City, they did not like Westbrook very much at all. Definitely I would say one of Houston's, the fan base at least, one of their least favorite players. So to have him now alongside Harden, it's definitely going to be interesting to see how quickly that fan base, changes their opinion of Westbrook. Because, again, for the Rockets to reach their ultimate success, those two guys are going to, again, have to adjust their games and have to fit in with each other's playing styles. Again, with Westbrook, arguably one of the most dominant personalities in the league. But, there is some, reason for optimism, just because that relationship between James has been long established. They were very, very close in Oklahoma City, and they have remained close since James went to Houston. So, but yeah, I think that the Rockets, that's Harden's team, and Westbrook is probably going to be the one to have to adjust how he plays.
I want to go back to one of your previous answers. You mentioned you thought Kawhi was the best player in the league. Mm-hmm. How much of that has to do with his playoff performance and playoff run in Toronto last year?
None. Going into the playoffs, I thought Kawhi was the best player in the league. It's just a matter of Kawhi staying healthy. And I think the Raptors really did a good job with managing how many games he played. I think the sweet spot for Kawhi is right over 60 games, because for one, with him being on the Clippers, he doesn't have to play 70, 75 games because that roster around him is so loaded. So they're not going to have to rely on Kawhi to, one, make the playoffs, and two, have a top seed, just because that roster is set up really nicely for them moving forward. But yeah, I think that, watching what he did in the playoffs, and him admitting that he wasn't 100% healthy, just what he does on both ends of the floor, arguably, a top three defender, one of the best scorers in the league, very good three-point shooter. I mean, he just does everything at such a high level. It's hard to find any sort of flaw in his game.
Well, now to move on, the main beneficiary of the Lakers-Pelicans trade seems to be New Orleans in terms of future value and what they added. Right. They also picked up Zion Williamson with the number overall pick. They have a bright future. Now, in terms of that Rookie of the Year race, to start with Zion, could you see anyone other than him really winning it, especially with all the hype behind Williamson?
Yeah, I mean, it's probably going to be hard for anybody to win the award if Zion does what everybody thinks he's going to do, just because, like you said, the hype that's coming in with Zion is probably the most since Anthony Davis came into the league. And I think we saw this last year with Luka Doncic. Luka came in as the EuroLeague MVP, a ton of hype. And once he started the way he did, started at a really, really, top-notch level. And that carried out throughout the season, even after, he started to trail off a bit toward the end of this season. And then we saw Trae Young elevate his game toward the latter half of the season. And it was still too much for Trae to overcome. So I think with Zion, if he starts off the way everybody thinks he's going to be, I just don't see how there's any way that Zion doesn't win the Rookie of the Year. Not to say that there aren't other rookies who could possibly win it. You look at Memphis and John Morant. Morant's going to be one of the most dynamic players. He should be at least starting game one. Really like his game at Murray State, especially with a young Memphis team who is not going to have many expectations. I would assume that the Grizzlies' plan is for just to unload Morant and do what he's going to do, much like what the Hawks did this past season with Trae Young and let him just take over the team and pretty much run it from the start of the season. So I think with the Rookie of the Year race, I'd be surprised if Morant or Zion didn't win.
You got to see Trae Young play on a regular basis last year. A lot of media members didn't, so I'm wondering, do you think he should have been the Rookie of the Year over Luka or a co-Rookie of the Year? What are your thoughts on that race?
No, I don't think Trae should have been the Rookie of the Year. For one, yes, what he did, excellent season, but the defense was certainly lacking. You can make the case that Trae was the worst defender in the league.
Wow.
No, if that was your take, I wouldn't necessarily strongly disagree with you. But he was definitely one of the worst defenders in the league, and there are two sides of the floor in basketball. What he did on offense, definitely dynamic. One of the best passers in the game, in my opinion, the top 10 passer. He obviously has the range to shoot from wherever he wants on the floor, which definitely helps others around him. What he did to elevate the games of John Collins, Dewayne Dedmon, Alex, in my opinion, I think it was just more than what Trae did in his rookie season. And I think a lot of that hindrance on Trae's game is based on the defensive side of the floor.
Of point guard, the type of leader or type of star in Atlanta, they can help draw free agents here in the next couple of years as the Hawks are continuing to rebuild and retool. Yeah,
no doubt. For one, I've talked to many stars this past season about Trae and what they think of him, and they already think highly of him, and that matters. And two, you have a point guard who, he doesn't need to score the ball to be effective. A lot of point guards across the league need a score to be effective. And I think the trend that we've seen over the past few years is that point guards mainly, in years past they were distributors first, but nowadays it seems like they're more so scorers than effectively distributing the ball. And, you talk to Trae and his favorite stat is the assist. And I think that matters when we talk about when the Hawks are going to start attracting big-time free agents, because stars want the ball, stars want to score, and if you have a point guard like Trae, who is, again, one of the best passers in the league, that's definitely going to be something that the Kawhis, the Kevin Durants, the LeBrons, they see that, and they're like, you know what, like, that's the kind of point guard that's going to help elevate my game. And if I also join this team, I can take this team to new heights that they haven't experienced just yet. It's just going to take one guy to say, this roster, the way it is right now, it's obviously super young. There's 7 players on the team right now who are 23 or younger. So it's only going to take one of these big-time stars to look at this roster, their cap situation, and say, you know what, like, this is the team that if I join and if I paired with another star, this team could be deadly in the Eastern Conference. But, I do think that they have the pieces to really attract a big-time star in, say, 2-3 years. And what I think is really beneficial for the Hawks is that, General Manager Travis Schlenk has clear the books of their bad contracts, their bad long-term contracts, I should say, because you still have Jabari Parker. I mean, not Jabari Parker.
Chandler Parsons.
Yep. Yeah, he's making $25 million this season, and he obviously shouldn't. There probably should be a decimal point between the 2 and 5. But yeah, I think that the Hawks are really set up nicely for the future, and I think Trey is definitely a big part of that.
Does what Kawhi Leonard did going to LA and the Clippers, does that kind of reaffirm what you're saying there in terms of Kawhi went to a team that built up the right way?
Yeah, no doubt. I think not only Kawhi, but you look at Kyrie and Kevin Durant. They joined Brooklyn, and obviously in those markets, the Clippers have always been second fiddle to the Lakers, and Brooklyn is always going to be second fiddle to New York, no matter how pathetic the Knicks are. So, I mean, I'm just being honest. They've been pathetic for 20 years, 20 plus.
Yep.
But I think that should give the Hawks hope, just because the Clippers and Nets have done things the right way. They got young talent. They developed that young talent. And, again, those two teams, they had the young core in place, and it only took one guy to say, you know what, we should be looking at the Clippers instead of the Lakers, or we should be looking at the Nets instead of the Knicks. So I think if, for years to come, you look at what the Clippers and Nets did, I think it should give other quote-unquote small market teams, not to say Atlanta's a small market team, but they've been viewed that way.
Right.
But I think that should give hope because, if you develop young players the right way, you develop your front office the right way, you have the right coaching staff in place, I mean, you have all the ingredients necessary to take that next step forward with the help of a couple superstars.
We're talking about the moves that KD and Kawhi made. Which one was more surprising to you when you first heard the news break?
I would probably say Durant, just because a lot of people thought that he was going to go to the Knicks, mainly because his agent, Rich Kleiman, gigantic Knicks fan. And that was the talk for most of the year, that Durant was going to leave Golden State no matter what happened and join the Knicks. That was, early in the year I heard that it was likely that Durant was going to leave for the Knicks, not the Nets. I know Durant did an interview with Chris Haynes at Yahoo, believe last week, and said that was never the plan. But again, I think that for Durant to join an organization like the Nets, again, speaks very highly of building your team the right way, having competent ownership in place. James Dolan, the Knicks owner, definitely not a favorable owner across all sports. And I think that shows that, again, if you build your team the right way, these stars are going to notice. And you look at what the Nets did in the playoffs this past year. Again, they didn't win, but, they made it interesting with Philadelphia, showed that the young pieces that they had were ready for a couple of superstars to help them take that next step. That's probably not going to happen this year just because Durant is likely out for the year with his torn Achilles. But when he does come back next year, we're talking about a team that should be on top of the Eastern Conference. So I think that move over Kawhi joining the Clippers, because the talk with Kawhi was always that he wanted to return to Southern California. It was just a matter of which team he would choose, the Clippers or the Lakers. And what we've seen out of Kawhi, he's not one of those that's going to join a super team or perhaps be the second or third fiddle on any team. So that move wasn't too surprising. But Durant joining the Nets over the Knicks, I think, was definitely more of a surprise in my opinion.
The way that Durant joined the Nets and the way that a few other high-profile players like Jimmy Butler, Malcolm Brogdon, Kemba Walker, the way they went to new teams was a little bit different. Through the sign and trade, there were 6 sign and trades that I counted. Is that something that is becoming a trend or something that you could see being a big part of the way the league offseason works in the near future?
Yeah, because, these teams don't want to lose a superstar for nothing. It hurts the team it hurts the incumbent team, say like the Warriors, who obviously got D'Angelo Russell. But, yeah, I think that if teams could, if a team like the Warriors, for example, they lose Kevin Durant, obviously, in free agency, and, they don't want to lose a player like Durant because he's one of the best players in the league when healthy. So, if you can get something out of that, and the Warriors did with the Nets, that's a route that pretty much every single team is going to explore if they can, work that deal and get it done. So, yeah, I think I see that trend, staying in place because, for these teams that are contenders year in, year out, in order to get back to, years past, they're going to have to do something to combat the loss of a star player. So, yeah, I see the sign and trade definitely staying around and being a trend moving forward.
Let's talk about some sleepers. Is there a sleeper pickup through a trade or a free agency signing that you could see coming to make a big impact for a playoff team?
I'm a big Malcolm Brogdon fan, and when with the Pacers in particular, that team was headed toward making a pretty decent run in the playoffs, and Oladipo obviously goes down with his knee injury, and you now have Malcolm Brogdon on that roster. I think that if everything goes right, they're definitely a team to watch out for in the East. In the Western Conference, I don't think many people are talking about the Jazz and what they did this offseason. In my opinion, I think they had one of the best off seasons in the league, probably a top 3 off season in my opinion. They add Mike Conley, who in my opinion is one of the most underrated point guards in the league. Not really sure how he hasn't made an All-Star game. I mean, I get it because he was in the Western Conference. I mean, he's been in the Western Conference, and you have to compete with guys like Westbrook and Steph Curry and the list. Joe Ingles, one of the league's best knockdown shooters. I think that team could definitely make a run. It wouldn't surprise me at all to see Utah a top 3 seed in the Western Conference this year, and possibly the Western Conference champions. I think that highly of them. So, in my opinion, getting Mike Conley for the Jazz and the Pacers getting Malcolm Brogdon, I really, really, really love those moves for those teams.
Do you have a sleeper draft pick? Anyone picked in the draft that you think can have a bigger impact, outperform their draft slot, and be better than expected?
Trying to think. I think I'm going to stick with the team I cover, the Hawks. I think getting Cam Reddish at 10 is definitely a steal for them.
Okay.
Just because if Reddish was allowed to come out of high school and go into the draft, he would have been probably a top 3 pick just on talent alone. He obviously didn't do much at Duke. Definitely a disappointing season for him. But we also have to realize that he was playing alongside, Zion and RJ Barrett. And, those 2 guys in particular are going to take a lot of the shots. They're going to get a lot of the attention. So I think if there was one team that is able to maximize the potential of Reddish, it's the Hawks. I didn't think that there was a better fit for him inside the top 10 than the Hawks, just because he doesn't have to be the guy. You have Trae Young, you have John Collins. That's going to help open the floor for him, because at Duke there really weren't many three-point shooters on that team, so the spacing was really off for Duke, and it showed. When they were in the NCAA tournament, that if you stop Zion or control him, and you control RJ, they don't really have another option just because the spacing was so bad. The Hawks have excellent spacing, so that's going to help Reddish really operate fluidly in space, really, become that secondary playmaker that the Hawks are looking for. There's still some question about whether Kevin Huerter could be that second playmaker alongside Trae Young, but we know that Reddish has the capabilities to be, that second playmaker that the Hawks really need. So if there was one person who I think could outperform his draft slot, it's Reddish, because based on talent alone, he's someone that, should definitely have been selected in the top 5. I'm not saying that he should have been drafted in the top 5, but, if we look at his talent and his potential, he definitely has top 5 written on him.
I want to ask you about some player comparisons for the Atlanta Hawks, starting with the guy we were talking about, Cam Reddish. Is there anyone that you think he compares to in the league currently, or a former NBA player?
Again, if he reaches his maximum potential, if everything goes his way, there are no bumps along the way, he's definitely a Paul George mold.
Wow.
Again, everything has to go his way. I'm not saying he's going to be able to reach that.
Right.
But again, if he's able to, hit that maximum potential, I think that the Hawks are definitely that team that can unlock that. And Paul George is the perfect example, in my opinion, to compare him to, just because, one, he has the length, he has the playmaking ability, and I think, not that many people talk about this part of his game, but Reddish is also a solid defender. And coming into the league already as a solid defender, for one, it's going to help the Hawks because they were atrocious on defense this past season, and they need defenders. So if Reddish can provide that, he's going to be able to get minutes on the floor, because the Hawks didn't really upgrade their defense all that much. They got DeAndre Hunter, who should be automatically one of the team's best defenders, but Reddish is also going to be should be one of the best defenders on the Hawks immediately. So if he can show Lloyd Pierce that, he can lock down some opposing players, he's going to be able to find his way on the floor. And if he finds his way on the floor, obviously, you get more confidence under you. You can show other teams like what you can do. So he's going to get that buzz if he finds his way on the floor. I don't think he's going to start right away, but I would expect him to get around 20 to 25 minutes per game.
How about the other rookie, DeAndre Hunter? Who do you compare him to?
Yeah, I think DeAndre, it's not a sexy pick, but I think DeMarre Carroll is a safe comparison, in my opinion. He's someone who, he's not going to be flashy. He's not going to be a guy who in crunch time is bringing the ball down the floor and operating your offense, but he's going to be a really solid player. He's going to play smart basketball, and for the Hawks, that's what they need. They need to cut down on their turnovers. They need to play smarter, because they just didn't do that this past season. So I think that's a safe comparison for him. If he reaches his maximum potential, a lot of comparisons are made between the Hawks and the Warriors, just because Trae Young and the Steph Curry comparisons. Whatever you feel about that, Travis Schlenk came from Golden State. Kevin Huerter has the Klay Thompson comparison. So I look at DeAndre Hunter, and he could be the Warriors version of Andre Iguodala, and that's a really, really solid player, and a player, when the Hawks do become a contender, someone who can make a really big difference. Because you look back a few years ago, and it wasn't Steph Curry who won MVP, it wasn't Draymond who won MVP, it was Andre Iguodala, and that's someone who holds a lot of value on any single team. And I think if Hunter reaches his maximum potential, he's definitely someone who I think can compare favorably to.
Well, you mentioned Trae Young and Kevin Huerter. Who do you think those two compare to?
I think Trae in particular, I see a lot of Steve Nash in his game. I know a lot of people, again, think of Steph Curry when they look at Trae just because he can shoot long-range threes. But Trae has that Steve Nash passing ability. The vision is there. I just think that him and Steve Nash, just have too many similarities, in my opinion. For John, it's an easy one. Prime Amari Stoudemire is what John Collins looks like right now. I know some people are going to be like, Amari Stoudemire, but you look at Amari Stoudemire and what he did throughout his career, he was one of the best power forwards in the league. And, if John continues his growth, not that many people watch Hawks basketball, but, John averaged nearly 20 and 10 this past season. And he did it on high efficiency. He had 63% true shooting, which is an unreal mark for someone who, takes threes and doesn't get all their baskets, all their buckets at the rim. So I think for the Hawks, you have someone who mirrors Steve Nash and who mirrors Amari Stoudemire. We're talking about a team that, again, if they put it all together in 2, 3, 4 years, we're talking about one of the best teams in the league.
And lastly, with Kevin Huerter, he's someone that surprised me a lot last year with the way he played. Mm-hmm. What do you think about him in terms of his comparison?
Yeah, I don't think many people really expected Huerter to perform the way he did. I remember talking to Lloyd Pierce about this before the season, but there were a lot of thoughts around the organization that Huerter would have to be sent down to the G League just because he wasn't ready yet. We look back to that first game of the season against the Knicks. Huerter played 4 minutes. He just wasn't ready to perform. And then you fast forward to game 82, and Huerter is one of the best rookies in the league. He was named a second-team All-Rookie. I think the amount of growth that he showed is up there with any sort of player in the league, just because, for one, there were absolutely zero expectations for Huerter. Zero. Nobody was expecting him to become a starter in year one, and he did. He took Ken Bazemore's spot in the lineup, and he actually performed really, really well. And I think moving forward, especially this season, it wouldn't come as a surprise to see Huerter shoot over 40% from three. He can possibly develop into that secondary playmaker like I was talking about before and become a really, really good threat for the Hawks on the perimeter. And I think that for him, I do think that the Klay Thompson comparison works for him just because, he showed that he's a very capable defender. He's not great just yet, but you can see that he has the skill set to become a very, very good defender. And again, the knockdown three-point shooting is there. He was disappointed this past season that he only shot 37%. He told me actually a few weeks ago that he should be shooting over 40% every single year with ease. So if he does that, the Klay comparison is definitely there for him.
The Hawks have a lot of exciting young players. Could you see a lineup with who I think are the 5 most exciting guys? Trae Young, Kevin Huerter, DeAndre Hunter, Cam Reddish, John Collins. Do you think we could see a lineup with all 5 of them together?
Yeah, I know that's like the dream lineup for Hawks fans, and it's understandable. I think for that lineup to work well, so you'll have Trae at point guard, obviously.
Right.
Kevin at shooting guard, Cam at small forward, DeAndre at power forward, and John at center. The only thing that is, I guess, a caution mark for me or caution flag is that, John in his 2 seasons hasn't really shown yet that he can be a very, very good defender. We look at the last year, with like 15 games left in the season, John really took a step forward defensively. It's just a matter now of if he can actually, do what he did in those last 15 games and actually do it for 82 games. If he can, then it's definitely something that it should be expected, because that would mean that John is taking a leap forward defensively, which he needs to. And again, DeAndre should already be one of the team's best defenders. He can likely guard either forward spot. Reddish, who I touched on before, what he showed at Duke, should suggest that he's going to be a very solid defender in the league. Kevin and Trey obviously are going to be your one and two. So I think for that lineup to work, I think a lot of it hinges on John's defense, because you don't want your center to be a liability on defense. And the Hawks are already going into the season with a liability on defense at the center position, because Alex Len is the likeliest option to start, in my opinion. And he's not a very good defender. So they're already going to be weak there defensively. But if John can take that step forward defensively, you can slide him at center, move Alex to the bench, and then you have a lot of other options you can work with, like the option we just said, that DeAndre could play power forward, and you can have Cam at the small forward position. But again, a lot of that hinges on John's defense.
The Hawks lost Dewayne Dedmon in free agency, and I know from everyone that watched the Hawks play, everyone knows he was a valuable player last year.
Mm-hmm.
What's the situation at the 5? You mentioned you think Alex Len will start. What do you see happening there?
Yeah, I think Alex Len is the likeliest option to start, just because I think he had a very good season last year. He rejuvenated his career a bit. He spent his first 5 years in Phoenix, where the bus label was thrown around quite a bit, and deservedly so. He was drafted number 5 overall by Phoenix, and just didn't live up to that draft slot. But he showed this past season that if you have the right development coaches in place, you have the right staff in place, he can definitely provide some value there. You lose Dedmon, and he's one of the best stretch 5s in the league. Shot 38% from 3, provided valuable rim protection. It's a big loss. I saw some free agency rankings heading into free agency that had Dedmon as a worse center than JaVale McGee.
Right. Yep.
And that just shows you that not that many people watch the Hawks, because that's absolutely ludicrous. It's a big loss for the Hawks, just because the centers right now on the roster are Len, Bruno Fernando, a second-round rookie, and Damian Jones, who hasn't really shown much of anything in his career so far. He's torn both pecs. He was buried on Golden State's depth chart, so he hasn't really shown what he can do just yet. So you have 3 guys who are kind of unproven. I mean, Len, yes, he showed what he can do last season, but who knows what he's going to be able to do with the starting job, because he only averaged 20 minutes per game this past season. And if he's the starting center, one would imagine that he's going to be getting at least 25 minutes per game. So you don't know how his body's going to be able to hold up. So, heading into the season, I think that there's legitimate concern at the 5, just because, the depth just isn't there. You have to hope that Fernando develops pretty much immediately. You have to hope that Jones, now that he actually has a chance to earn meaningful minutes, he started, I think, 20 games this past season for the Warriors. He was the starting center in game 1, and forget what happened. Oh yeah, he got injured, obviously. But for him, this is his really big shot to earn the starting job and hold it. So I think that battle in training camp is definitely going to be one of the ones to watch, just because, again, it's not that Alex has that spot locked up like the other positions, in my opinion. Probably small forward, you can make the case that it's going to be DeAndre Hunter or Cam Reddish. I think Hunter definitely has the easier path to earning that role, but the center spot is not locked down at all. I just think that Len, he shot 36% from 3. He gives the Hawks the spacing they want on offense. But again, like I mentioned before, his defense is just lacking. Jones is someone who, is a likely better defender right now. Fernando, once he develops, he'll likely be a better defender than Alex Len. So I think that role is definitely up for grabs. It's just going to be a matter of who looks best in training camp. But right now, I would say that Len is the penciled-in starter at center.
Bruno Fernando is intriguing to me. I saw him mocked as high as going number 17 overall, fell to the Hawks in the second round.
Mm-hmm.
What can we realistically expect to get out of him?
Yeah, well, for one, I thought it was a win for the Hawks to get him in the second round. About a month prior to the draft, I had wrote on The Athletic that Fernando was one of the guys that the Hawks were looking at because they wanted to fill a center spot after losing they expected to lose Dedmon in free agency. But Fernando, they had him as a late first-round guy. The plan was, because the Hawks entered draft night with 3 first-round picks, 8, 10, and 17, if they weren't able to move up in the draft, obviously they did, but if they weren't able to, they had a plan to move down toward the bottom half of the first round and possibly get Bruno Fernando if he was still on the board. So to get him in the second round was a big win for them. Obviously, you lock him up for 3 years on a very, very cheap deal. But for him, he's super raw, very, very raw. That's why I don't think he's going to be able to start right away, like a DeAndre Hunter or even a Cam Reddish. But when he does develop, there's definitely a lot of hope inside the Hawks organization that Fernando is going to develop into the team's center of the future. He's likely not going to show what he can possibly be in year one, just because I think that they're going to move him along slowly. He still needs to show that he can shoot. We saw a little bit of that in Summer League. He definitely, for his size, has a lot of fluidity, but he didn't shoot many three-pointers at Maryland in his 2 seasons. But, again, we've seen the Hawks, turn John Collins into a three-point shooter. He took 0 three-pointers in college, and now he's shooting 35, 36% from 3. So I think that the plan for Fernando is develop his jumper, develop his confidence with his jumper. From talking to Fernando several times now since he's been drafted, he definitely has a lot of confidence in his jumper, but that could change when we actually have real meaningful games played. But right away, I think Fernando is someone who is going to be able to provide rim protection. He's going to provide energy and effort. I think back to the pre-draft workouts, and I don't think that there was a more energetic player, in my opinion, than Fernando. So he's going to provide that, and in turn, with that energy and effort, he's likely going to become one of Lloyd Pierce's favorites. So that's going to help Fernando, get meaningful minutes. And I think it's probably likely that we'll see him somewhere between 15 to 20 minutes per game this season. I don't expect him to get minutes that Hunter or Reddish would, just because I think that they're gonna try and bring Fernando along pretty slowly.
We both agree that Dewayne Dedmon's a valuable player. Would it have been a bad idea for the Hawks to re-sign him and match a 4-year, $40 million deal like the one he got?
See, I really like Dedmon. I don't think that Dedmon and the Hawks, for where they are right now, they're not really on the same timeline.
Okay.
I think that Dedmon, this is probably going to be his last opportunity to get a really, really nice, lucrative deal with some long-term stability. The Hawks only wanted to re-sign him for 1 to 2 years, preferably 1 year, just because, the plan going into the draft was to get a center, whether that be Jackson Hayes out of Texas, who the Pelicans got, or someone like Fernando. So I just don't think that their timelines really matched up. So it didn't really make a lot of sense for the Hawks to sign Dedmon to a 3 or 4 year deal, just because, one, you don't really know who's going to stick around on this roster, and you don't want to be locked into a guy who, say, in 3 years, Trae Young doesn't pan out, or Kevin Huerter doesn't pan out, or John somehow plateaus early for some reason and you're locked into a center for 4 years. It just didn't make a lot of sense for the Hawks to do that right now.
When the Hawks have made moves this offseason, generally I've been able to understand what they were doing. There's one that I was confused about, and that was the trade of Amari Spellman. I was wondering, it seemed like they kind of gave up on a first-round pick after 1 year, and I had seen some flashes from him. I'm sure you did too. What did you think about that move? How do you make sense of what happened there?
Yeah, I mean, the timing definitely threw me off because I remember he was traded on a Monday, and I had talked to Lloyd that Sunday, so the day prior, and Lloyd was talking to me like, Amari was a part of the team's future. I mean, it wasn't any secret. If you had eyeballs, you could see that Amari was still overweight, and it was an issue that he dealt with this past season very publicly. I mean, he called himself fat, quote unquote. So it wasn't like it was a secret that Amari needed to work on his conditioning and his diet. And once we saw Amari in Las Vegas, it was clear that not much progress had been made. So from what I was told is that the Hawks just grew tired of, kind of babysitting Amari. Amari knew that he needed to change and get better, and, he just didn't. I think for some young players, the adjustment from college to the NBA is harder for some than others. And, I had talked to Amari on several occasions about this, but, he really struggled with having a lot of free time and having, seeing over $1 million in his bank account because he was able to do whatever he wanted. And, some players deal with that better than others, and Amari just couldn't work it out. I do think that, for the Hawks, you are able to sign someone like Jabari Parker, who effectively took Amari's spot on the roster. And Jabari, for where both players are right now, I mean, he's just a better basketball player. So you improve the roster with Jabari over Amari. Yes, Amari was a first-round draft pick. But if you can improve the roster for someone who, is only 24 years old, he's shown glimpses of, being able to be a pretty good player in this league. There's obviously defensive concerns. But you improved your roster with Jabari. And it's unfortunate for Spellman just because, he really wanted to, grow with these young guys. He really developed strong relationships with not only the players, but he was really close with Lloyd Pierce. He was really close with Greg Foster, one of the assistant coaches. So it's very unfortunate, but you hope, person to person, that this is sort of a wake-up call for him. He's obviously going to one of the best organizations with Golden State. He's going to have excellent veteran leadership. You better believe that Draymond is going to be on him if he isn't eating properly and working out properly. So I think that this is a good career move for Spellman, just because he's going to a very, very stable organization that is going to look after him. So you just hope that this is the wake-up call for him.
You talked about Jabari Parker. Offensively, I feel like with his age only being 24, I feel like he's got a lot of potential. He can be the player that we all thought he would be coming out of Duke. Defensively, I know there are the concerns. What do you think we could expect to see from him in an Atlanta uniform with this young team?
Yeah, I think, for one, I think he'll be the top scorer off the bench. We look at what the Hawks have done in previous summers. So Dedmon, he leaves San Antonio. Nobody really thinks that's an important move. And he develops into a very competent three-point shooter, a very competent setter. And again, when that move happened for the Hawks, no one really thought much of it. Last summer, they signed Alex Len. Again, nobody really cared all that much. But Len showed that, okay, like he actually does have value. He actually does have something to his game that he didn't show in the 5 years in Phoenix. And then you fast forward to this summer, and the plan is, well, the hope is that Jabari becomes that signing for the Hawks where Dedmon increased his value, Len increased his value. Jabari has shown, again, he's shown that he's a very, very good scorer when he's healthy, and you know, when and if he's healthy, and that if is very big. You know, he's had 2 very, very serious knee injuries, and it's something that he's continuing to deal with. You know, he said during his introductory press conference that one of the reasons why he signed with Atlanta is because the training staff is so highly regarded. So, you know, he has to stay healthy. And if he does stay healthy, it's just a very, very good option off the bench for the Hawks. You have to always be concerned about his defense just because defense has been a gigantic issue for him throughout his career, and he's shown very little effort on that side of the floor. He very famously said that, you know, he doesn't get paid to play defense, and he comes to a Hawks organization that, yes, they were very bad on defense this past season, but Lloyd Pierce is a defensive-minded coach. You know, he said plenty of times this past season that defense wasn't something that he was trying to emphasize. He just wanted to get like the foundational structure in place before he started implementing his defensive schemes. You would assume in year 2 that we'll see a better defensive effort from the team as a whole. And Jabari's going to have to adjust. Otherwise, again, he's not going to play much because Lloyd definitely prefers very good defense. So, you know, if Jabari does show improvement on that end of the floor, I think it's a home run signing. You know, that they get him for a very reasonable contract, $6.5 million a year. I think the only surprise, in my opinion, for that contract is giving Parker a player option, just because he's not really a star. He's not really starter material. He can probably start on some teams. He obviously isn't on this team just because John Collins is the starting power forward. But to give him a player option was definitely a little confusing. But again, if he shows what Dedmon did 2 years ago and Alex Len did last year, I think it could be a very good signing for the Hawks.
For the Hawks starting lineup on opening day, I'm guessing Trae Young, Kevin Huerter, and then at the 4 or 5, John Collins and Alex Len. Who's at the 3 for Atlanta?
I'd be surprised if it was anyone other than DeAndre Hunter.
That's what I thought.
You know, you trade Taurean Prince to Brooklyn, who was last year's starter at the 3. You know, they were not pleased with Taurean's effort on the defensive end. And, you know, the Hawks end up prioritizing defense with that number 4 pick. You know, someone who is going to have higher efficiency. So it would be a surprise if it was anyone other than Hunter, because again, like I touched on before, you know, he should be one of the team's better defenders, if not the best defender. So it would be a surprise if it was anyone other than Hunter.
In that lineup, the starting lineup, does Hunter guard the other team's best player or best scorer?
That's the hope.
Okay.
For rookies, you know, they might be a really good college defender, but sometimes it takes time to adjust to the speed of the game. So for the Hawks, yes, that's the hope that, you know, Hunter can automatically guard Kawhi or guard LeBron or whoever. But, you know, starting out, game 1, are we going to see in crunch time if that game comes down to the wire with the Pistons? Is DeAndre Hunter guarding Blake Griffin? It's definitely something to watch. I want to see that happen just because that'll tell us a lot automatically of how they view Hunter and where they view him in terms of his development path. So I think the plan for now is to, again, like what we saw this past season, they brought the rookies along pretty slowly outside of Trae. I could see them bringing DeAndre Hunter along slowly. Yes, he's going to be a starter, but they're not going to ask much of him, I would assume. But if that game against the Pistons is any indication of what happens, again, if he's guarding Blake Griffin, if it's a close game, I think that'll tell us a lot for how they view him.
One thing for Atlanta that's been in the news lately, Vince Carter returning for his 22nd season. What kind of role could you see him playing in his 22nd year?
Talking to Vince last season, he wanted to go to an organization that would allow him ample playing time. I just don't see that this year, just because they have a younger roster than what they did this past season. Obviously the plan is for the Hawks to have, guys like Hunter, Reddish, Jabari. They want the young players to get as many minutes as possible. So I just think that the role for Vince this year is probably going to be much more limited than what it was this past season, when they had to rely on him in certain games just because the amount of injuries that they had. There are always injuries, so Vince will definitely get playing time. I just don't think he'll get as much as what he got last year. So his role is pretty much going to be that veteran leader in the locker room, the extension of the coaching staff, the guys that, you can turn to Vince and get as much advice as possible. And Vince really likes that role. So it's a good organization for him to be on, just because he really likes being a veteran leader. He really likes when young players ask him questions. So I think that the Hawks are definitely a good fit for Vince, but I'm not sure how much playing time he's actually going to get.
The NBA and the Atlanta Hawks schedule recently dropped earlier this week. Which Hawks games are you most looking forward to?
Personally, it doesn't matter to me, just because I get paid the same, whether it's they're playing the Suns or they're playing the Clippers.
Sure.
I still get the same paycheck. So, but I think for fans, Luka versus Trae is obviously going to be a thing for the rest of their careers. Their first matchup is February 1st, so that's definitely a game that it's going to draw a lot of eyeballs, just because they're going to be compared to each other for the rest of time, whether people like it or not. That's just the way it is. I think that one in particular is one I'm looking forward to. Anytime the Lakers come to town, it's obviously a spectacle. The Celtics, the Warriors. I think for me personally, last year was my first year covering the NBA and the Hawks in particular. Kent Bazemore definitely helped me out personally, just because, I was able to go to Kent whenever I really had questions that I thought were dumb to ask in like a public setting, and I can just go to him privately and he would answer and help me out tremendously. So, the first time they play the Blazers comes early in the season. It's that 5-game road trip early in November. I'm looking forward to getting up to Portland and seeing how Bazemore is adjusting to, being in Portland, because I know, we talked about it several times, that he wanted to spend the rest of his career in Atlanta. Obviously, it didn't work out that way. So that's definitely a game that I'm most looking forward to, just personally.
In terms of the national NBA schedule, is there any game that you looked at or that you heard of that you saw and it was kind of that drop everything, cancel your plans, like must-see TV? Is there any game like that for you as a fan or as a reporter?
Obviously, the Clippers-Lakers rivalry this year is going to be really fun to watch, just because those are two teams that there's going to be a lot of attention on them. Two teams that could potentially win the championship. That rivalry should heat up this year. Rockets Thunder should be another good one, especially, it's looking like Chris Paul is going to at least start the season out with Oklahoma City. And now having Harden and Westbrook on the Rockets, that's definitely a game that I'm most looking forward to. But I'm just one of those who could watch a Suns Magic game and enjoy it. So there's not like one game where I'm like, I need to watch it, just because, I'd watch a Suns Magic game and have fun.
My final question for you, back to the Atlanta Hawks. What do you think is the ceiling for their team? I've heard some people say playoffs. I've heard some people say the number 10 spot in the East. What do you think is the ceiling for the Atlanta team?
I think the ceiling for them, if everything goes well for them, I could see them being the 7th seed. I can't see them being any higher than that. I think the floor for them is probably the 10th seed. And I think that's a more realistic scenario for them, because I really like their roster. I just think that they don't have the experience just yet to really compete even in a weak Eastern Conference. I think they're going to take a leap forward this year. I think that the over-under, if I remember correctly, is like 32.5, 33.5. I could see the Hawks winning somewhere between 34 and 36 games. I think that's a reasonable number for them. To get to the playoffs, I think last year it was 41 wins or 42 wins. I think they needed to be right over 500 to make the playoffs. The Hawks won 29 games last year. There were a lot of very close games that, with more experience, they probably win. So with them, with John and being in year 3, Kevin, Trey, year 2, they have that experience this year. I don't know if it's going to be enough to, reach that 7th seed or even an 8th seed, but I do expect the Hawks to be very competitive. And for them, I think that's what matters more. They would obviously like to make the playoffs, but it's not something that a lot of people in the organization are like, this needs to happen this year. Like, if it's playoffs or bust, like, that's not really the thought process with this organization, just for where it is. But I do expect them to take a leap forward. It wouldn't surprise me to see them in the playoffs, but right now, if I was projecting them, I just don't think that's going to happen.
A follow-up to that, just real quick. When do you think the time will come for the Hawks where their organization's saying, all right, we have to make the playoffs now, or we have to push for a top 4 seed? When do you see those types of benchmarks coming?
Next year they should definitely be shooting for the playoffs and, trying to make a run at things. They're going to have $70 million in cap space this upcoming summer, which is a lot of money to do a lot of creative things. The free agency class next summer is very weak, so I wouldn't expect them to, make moves just to make moves. But they could use that space creatively and acquire people in trades. You never know who's going to become available in trades. But I think next year we should start hearing more about, okay, like we have a foundation in place. We have the right pieces in place. Now it's time to start making moves toward making a run in the playoffs, get to the second round, maybe surprise some people and make the Eastern Conference Finals. Do I think that's going to happen next year? No. But I think next year is when we're going to really see them take that next step forward and try to make it run with things.
Well, Chris, that's all the questions I had for you. Thank you so much for joining me on the show. You cover a great young team in the Atlanta Hawks. Best of luck to you in the future.
Thanks a lot. You too.
Thank you again to Chris for joining me on the Birds and Braves podcast. Please be sure to follow the show on social media at Birds Braves Pod. You can check out Chris's articles in the future at www.theathletic.com. Look up the Hawks and you'll get his great coverage. Now that concludes today's show. I appreciate you all tuning in. We'll be back next Thursday with another one. Thank you.